This is a country, obviously, that has a number of security measures in place. Last year, we saw those attacks and counterattacks, retaliation that happened when Israel attacked Iran, and then Iran responded with missile and drone strikes as well. So many in this country are prepared for the possibility of an attack. But this was an announcement that was made in the middle of the night, again at around 3 o'clock in the morning here. Sirens sounded across the country as the Israeli authorities announced that this preemptive strike had happened. There has been also reaction from Washington. The Americans are saying that they were not involved in this attack. It was very interesting that the Israelis were saying that they would go ahead with this attack even if they didn't have American support for this attack on Iran. And we've seen that in the last few weeks there has been this effort by the Trump administration to try to strike a deal with Iran, to negotiate a deal with Iran over its nuclear program. So again, there was a round of talks expected to happen on Sunday, but again, this attack happening today, something that the Israeli authorities are describing as a preemptive strike on Iran's nuclear capabilities and also facilities and capabilities related to Iran's nuclear program.
And Hugo, we've seen Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have the support for what he's been doing in Gaza has been a little bit divided of late. Is there a universal support for him with these actions into Iran?
Yeah, I think for years the Prime Minister has been, talking about the threat that he sees as an existential threat posed by Iran's nuclear program. So even though perhaps the timing of this particular attack is a surprise, it is not surprising that Israel has decided to take action against Iran. But, as you say, this is happening as Israel continues with its war against Hamas in Gaza. The country is, isolated. There is growing isolation of Israel internationally because of what's happening in Gaza, the humanitarian crisis there, and also, the hostage crisis. Many of the families here in Israel have been accusing the Prime Minister of prolonging the war in Gaza for political purposes to guarantee the survival of his coalition. And as Israel now carries out this attack on Iran, the war in Gaza continues. But what Israeli officials have been saying for quite some time is that they saw a window of opportunity here because the attacks that happened last year, the Israeli attacks on Iran, caused significant damage to Iran's air defenses. And you also have, Iranian-backed groups in the region that have been significantly weakened in the last few months, including Hezbollah in Lebanon and also the Houthis in Yemen. And there's always been the concern in Israel that any kind of Israeli military action against Iran could trigger a response by these groups, particularly Hezbollah in Lebanon, which obviously shares a border with Israel. Hezbollah had a vast arsenal of weapons, and there was the concern that any kind of Israeli action could trigger a response by Hezbollah. So for quite some time, the Israeli authorities had been saying that they saw an opportunity here to strike, facilities linked to Iran's nuclear program, and it seems that that's what's happening right now.
And Hugo, we can just hear some words from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who was speaking in the last hour or so.
We targeted Iran's main enrichment facility in Natanz. We targeted Iran's leading nuclear scientists working on the Iranian bomb. We also struck at the heart of Iran's ballistic missile program. Last year, Iran fired 300 ballistic missiles at Israel. Each of these missiles carries a ton of explosives and threatens the lives of hundreds of people. Soon, those missiles could carry a nuclear payload, threatening the lives not of hundreds, but of millions. Iran is gearing up to produce 10,000 of those ballistic missiles within 3 years. Now just imagine 10,000 tons of TNT landing on a country the size of New Jersey. This is an intolerable threat. It too must be stopped.
Netanyahu there talking in the last hour or so about those preemptive strikes on Iran. Hugo, just to get your thoughts, he was very keen to express or to point that it was very specifically targeting Iran's nuclear program and nuclear capabilities that he was saying that they have and the threat that it poses to Israel. Also, interestingly, he did also reference the damage that it could cause Israel using a reference of the size of a U.S. City of New Jersey.
Yeah, he's trying that to explain, Israel's actions today. Obviously, the Americans are saying that they had no involvement militarily in the attacks that happened today. But again, the Prime Minister, for a very long time, for years, has been talking about the threat of Iran's nuclear program. The Iranians have been saying that this is a program for, peaceful purposes. Obviously, there was a deal that was, agreed between especially the Americans and also the Iranians during the Obama administration. President Trump, in his first term, pulled out from this deal. So there was an escalation of the nuclear crisis with Iran. And since President Trump returned to office earlier this year, there has been an attempt to strike a new deal with Iran. Observers had been saying that Iran was compliant with the deal. President Trump didn't like the deal. And now there was an effort to try to reach a new deal with Iran over its nuclear program. Now, during these negotiations, the Israeli authorities had been vocal that there were some terms that they would not accept in terms of uranium enrichment. And we've seen now that a military official in Israel said that Iran had enough material to create 15 nuclear bombs in a few days. And he said that there were secret attempts by Iran recently to assemble those weapons. So the Israelis very keen here to talk about the threat in their view of that was being posed by Iran's nuclear program. So now, a number of targets being hit, dozens of targets being hit across Iran, targets related to the country's nuclear program.
Hugo, thanks very much for giving us that update and context from Jerusalem. Hugo Bashega there. Let's go to Washington now and get the view from the United as well, live from the U.S. Capitol. Jake, the U.S. administration have been very quick to distance themselves from any involvement in these strikes.
That's right. We heard from the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, immediately sending out a statement saying that this is Israel's doing, that Israel is taking a unilateral strike against Iran, that U.S. had nothing to do with it, that U.S. is not cooperating in military ways or any other way, and that their first focus is really to protect the U.S. personnel, whether it be troops, civilians, or diplomatic staff in the region. Now, we know that yesterday the Americans were starting to evacuate its non-essential staff from the Baghdad as well as the dependents, and they have given order to some of its citizens to leave the region because they believed there is a credible threat against Americans in the region, and that they were told that Israel is fully ready to launch operation into Iran. Now, it seemed like Americans were not aware when this attack will happen, but if the attack were to happen, the Iranians would retaliate not only by targeting Israelis, but they will be targeting Americans, especially because that's exactly what the Iranian defense minister said yesterday, that if Iran was to be taken into a conflict, that they will retaliate by targeting American bases. And America stations about 2,500 troops in Iraq, not to include any other civilian contractors or the diplomatic staff. So their focus right now is really to warn Iran against escalating this further with the Americans, by striking American personnel, and to really, taking care to protect the American personnel in the region.
Jake, thanks very much for giving us that update from Washington and providing that context for us with the American response. And we're going to continue the conversation here in studio with Jean-Louis Saman. He's Senior Research Fellow at the Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore. Jean-Louis, great to have you in today to talk about this. What's your first initial reaction to these strikes by Israel?
Well, the first reaction is the surprise with the timing, especially the last days. We were speculating a lot about the potential strikes, but we were still considering that the first thing would be the talks between the US and Iran on Sunday. So the fact that we have this strike on Friday completely changes the whole narrative. The second aspect, as just mentioned, is the consequences for the US and the US-Israel relations, because it's very unclear one, how much the U.S. Knew about it. So far, it seems that the U.S. was not involved in any way with those strikes. And the consequences, first, on the safety of U.S. personnel, U.S. Citizens in the region, and what it means also for the next step, which will be very likely the Iranian retaliation. And this will probably force the U.S. also to get involved alongside Israel. So all of that is raising a lot of questions for the coming days, I would say.
Yeah, President Trump had gone on record saying he didn't want Israel to strike Iran, but that has now happened. So what do you think that does for the relationship between himself and Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, that's a key question. We know that the relationship was quite difficult even before President Trump came back to the White House. But over the last weeks, we saw when President Trump visited the region that Israel was not a big priority on his agenda. But now I think he will take this attack, this preemptive attack from Israel, almost as a personal offense. The fact that you had for the past days clear messages from the White House that President Trump is not endorsing that operation. And the fact that right now, if you will look at the first statements, for instance, from Secretary of State Rubio, the U.S. is first and foremost clarifying that it is not involved and is not supporting that operation.